Now, ever since the Walt Disney Company decided to cancel the UK premiere for Snow White 2025, featuring both Rachel Zegler and Gal Gadot, it is nothing more than a disaster at this point. We know that Bob Iger, the Disney CEO, along with the executives, the board of directors that are handling this movie in the worst way possible, mind you, what they should have done earlier on is that they should have scrapped this movie and locked it up in a vault, very similar to what they did with the Batgirl film. Of course, that was a different studio, but they could have definitely Batgirled this movie if they wanted to, way ahead of time. This is Mike Zero. Subscribe if you're new, and like this video to see future updates. You can also follow me at Mike01. I thank you also very much for the great and kind support. So the whole Rachel Zegler and Gal Gadot drama continues, and it's only worsening over time. However, there's a lot of bombshell news surrounding Rachel Zegler when it comes to the production of Snow White. Now, one thing about this movie that you may or may not know is that they went through 3 rounds of reshoots, alright? We're talking about where they went through 3 phases of really attempting to redo this movie, to rearrange the scenes, to change the pacing, to really kind of give a different avenue for the film, and it just did not work for director Mark Webb, for writer Greta Gerwig. They had a very difficult time with Disney's demands about that, and it really led to a lot of other issues. However, when it involves Rachel Zegler's behavior toward Gal Gadot, this is where things begin to get quite interesting and juicy when it comes to everything going on with the Snow White drama. Let's jump into this. Now, one thing about Snow White is that we already know that Rachel Zegler did tons of damage to this actual movie, based on what she said about the 1937 original, also based on what she talked about when she literally just trashed on the Brothers Grimm tale. That was like the first installment of Snow White at the time, way back when. But interestingly enough, alright, with, of course, everything going on now with the drama surrounding Snow White, already a complete nightmare for the Walt Disney Company, one monumental development going on now involves the aftermath of the feud between both Rachel Zegler and Gal Gadot. Now, a major update that serves as a piece of bombshell news involving Zegler and Gal involves how Zegler had a moment of outrage, as it turns out, during the reshoots for Snow White 25. One scene in particular that ended up being a very complex scene to the point that it caused Rachel Zegler to scream at Gal was for a very important sequence that was shot for the 3rd act of the film that actually involved Snow White, the villagers, and the 7 dwarves storming the Evil Queen's castle. Now, one moment that involved both Zegler and Gadot having a moment of outrage between takes involved how Rachel claimed that Gal was ruining her scenes by not remembering her lines and not acting in a way that was demanded by Rachel Zegler. This scene took a total of, get this, 25 takes to complete, where the Evil Queen gives an intimidating speech to Snow White, leading to a point where they both exchange an argument about saving society. Now, Gal reportedly was shocked that Rachel shouted at her after not only improvising some lines of dialogue to spice up the scene, but also how Gal specifically requested the director and writer of the film to alter the scene altogether in order to make it darker in tone. Rachel had a very intense issue with how Gal convinced the creative changes to the scene, since it took away the limelight and attention from Snow White in the moment, something that Rachel was very offended over after what Gal requested to the Disney executives, as well as the entire creative team. It all came to a point where when Rachel shouted at Gal, she labeled her as the one being very difficult and a waste of time to get things done on schedule. To make matters worse for Rachel Zegler's sake is that when she shouted and yelled at Gal, this was the moment when the majority of the cast and the crew no longer wanted to be associated with Rachel. It was in this moment that Gal herself decided to part ways from Rachel and to not engage in any interviews with her side by side. The scene is reportedly not going to be a part of the final cut, since there were so many errors in the scene as far as continuity goes, since they reshot it twice, both in 2022 and 2024. It's unclear if the scene will reach the digital version, however. Rachel blamed Gal for taking away her best acting bits in the 3rd act. Now, guys, before I move on about all of this, because there's more to discuss, what's interesting about this is the fact that Rachel was being very overly demanding. She was trying to act like a director, trying to act like a writer, because she wanted the entire scene to be acted in a specific way. She wanted it to be synchronized in a very specific way, and it was not working out for Gal. In fact, it got to a point where Gal improvised scenes in this third act moment for the film that was going to serve as the grand finale of the movie. And it turns out that director Mark Webb and Greta Gerwig actually liked Gal's idea of improvising scenes. And Rachel was very offended about that because in the end, like I said before, it took away the limelight of Snow White. It took away screen time and very important moments for Snow White in the third act where things kind of flip upside down. Everything goes more toward the evil queen in that moment as opposed to Snow White, and that's why Rachel Zegler had a very big problem with Gal Gadot and blamed her on being a time waster, blamed her on not remembering her lines and being very difficult to work with, when in reality, it's quite the opposite. It's all Rachel Zegler who's very difficult to work with. Even director Mark Webb had a tough time with her on several occasions. We already talked about this like months ago of what happened there, so I don't think that I need to necessarily repeat that. But what's interesting about this in isolation is how Gal Gadot was actually yelled at by Rachel Zegler because she improvised those moments. Now, continuing on here, this scene was said to be Rachel's best performance in her mind, and she grew very frustrated when Gal was able to convince the creative team behind the film to make some drastic last-minute changes. This, in turn, also is why they had a major delay for the film by an entire year to work out and fix the entire third act of this movie. So you guys may recall that this film was supposed to drop in March of last year, March of 2024. They delayed it until this year, and a lot of it had to do with the third act of the film, right? The grand finale of the movie getting completely changed, receiving a major makeover, and really kind of leaning more towards scenes catered to the evil queen instead, as opposed to Snow White. And so I think at the end of the day, when you look at things like this, when you look at the production hell of Snow White, that's exactly why Disney is panicking. That's why they also canceled the UK premiere. A lot of it had to do with, like I said earlier, Gal wanted nothing to do with Rachel Zegler in the public eye. She did not want to be seen on camera with her. She did not want to be seen in person with Rachel. The only exception was at the Oscars, and even then, it looked very awkward because they absolutely refused to look at each other, and it's growing evidence of exactly what's been going on here behind the scenes, and also publicly speaking. So again, like I say, to top things off, when Rachel shouted at Gal, she surprisingly had to be briefly taken off the set to calm down and to read over lines for another scene to be shot. This was the deal breaker for Disney in the moment, as well as for the cast and the crew. So look, this is why Rachel is not getting additional Disney deals or Disney roles per se, disconnected from Snow White. We all know, we talked about this, there was supposed to be other Snow White films. There were supposed to be, kind of similar to what they're doing with The Lion King, right? You got The Lion King, and then you got Mufasa. They want to create a Scar movie. I don't think that's going to work out, honestly. I don't see that really moving forward anymore, but focusing on Snow White in isolation here, the fact that they were going to have more movies lined up featuring Rachel Zegler, to have a sequel, and perhaps even a sequel after that, to kind of base it off of different iterations of Snow White that were done in the past, through animation, to convert that into live action. That did not work out, and a lot of it had to do with her behavior. But overall, I would like to hear what everyone has to say about this below in the comments, and if you guys did enjoy the content for today, make sure to drop a thumbs up on this video to support the channel, and I will catch you guys later.